Hello and welcome to my first assess tutorial. I want to go over how to make a small little room. You can see that I'm starting here with a cube inside of Blender, scaling it down, and then scaling it upwards on the top so that I can see that it's a square. You see it's a bit too big there, so I resize it down to be about maybe 2 or 1, just so it's a bit thinner. See, now I'm just making it even more thinner, getting a look from it from the side, and then naming it the floor. Next, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it with Shift D, make sure not to move it, and then rotating it with R, then tapping Y and moving it across 90 degrees using the rotate tool. I then move it into place to be our first little wall. You can see that it snapped very easily. That was done by holding Control. You can even line it up with the floor using vertex snapping. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the same, but for the second wall. You see here that one's already at the right height because I duplicated the wall. I've gone ahead and put it in the middle, so I move it back on the y-axis. See there, now that's the base of the room complete. However, 2 of them are still called the floor. I'm going to go ahead and set up a boolean. You see there I spawn in a cube, however I don't actually end up doing that. I end up using the add cube tool so that I can draw on the grid and make it the right size that I want. You see there it's only touching it, so I have to push it through the model first. I'm also adjusting the shading so that you can see better by adding cavity for both screen and the world. And you can see that adds a bit more of harsh edges to there with the matcat. Just going to center it a bit. You see there the hole has appeared, and I just have to hide it by pressing H. Now pressing H will cause issues here, and as you'll see later, where it will appear in the rendered view, however will not appear in the viewport. You'll see that more later. I'm also just renaming each wall to be the shelf wall and the window wall. Here I'm adding the shelf, using again the add cube tool, going into the locked view so that I can push it through the wall so it lines up just against it. And then go ahead and grab the shelf and move it out. Doing the same again, I press Shift D to make a duplicate of it. This is going to be the things holding up the shelf. So I shrink these down to be quite small, moving them along to just be near towards the end, but not quite at the end. They're currently a little too tall, so I'm going to end up attaching them to the vertex of the shelf, so there's no gap. And as you can see, they go a bit too far out the wall, so I'm going to end up pushing those back. You can see here I did it on the wrong axis. I did it on the x-axis, where I should have done it on the y-axis. You see that it visually indicated using the coloured lines. Next, I go ahead and duplicate it and move one over to the other side. So now I have our base block out done. I'm going to go ahead and add the table in the middle of the room. You see here that it's not quite a perfect circle until I hold Shift and it starts to snap to be a perfect circle. So I'm just trying to line it up there with the center of the room, as closely as possible. You would end up checking the 2 different origins for the floor and the cylinder. However, you see there moving freehand doesn't quite work, and you shouldn't really do that anyway. So what I ended up doing was setting the cylinder to snap to the floor so that the origins were the same. See selection to active, and it looks like the cylinder's disappeared. However, you can see it in the floor there. Just pulling it out slightly so that it's centered in the room. And there's no face in between. See, I'm adding an inset face so that I can bevel the edge nice and easily. See, I've duplicated it there again. Shrink it down really far. And you see that I'm scaling on the z-axis. I could have also alternatively just grabbed the top face of the cylinder and moved it up using the z-axis. That would work just the same. For this demonstration, I use two different separate shapes. See, I'm just trying to line it up there with the base so that there's no gap in the floor. Trying a couple different things, however, because the origin is in the middle and I'm doing it not in edit mode, it doesn't really want to snap perfectly. So I ended up doing it freehand. See there's an inset face on top. I'm going to dissolve those edges because you won't see them, just to save a bit on topology, even deleting the face. I duplicate the bottoms to make the top of the table, and then I end up shrinking the bottom bit just a little bit. But you see there, it's moved it off the ground, so I have to move it right back down to 1, and it stays the same scale on the z-axis. I'm also going to go ahead and add a bevel by doing Control B, changing the segments just a little bit, add a bit more curve, and shading smooth by angle. Just like makes it look a little nicer in terms of shading. You can see there I switched to the shading view. You can also add a bevel in a different way. You can use something called the bevel modifier. This is similar to 3ds Max chamfer tool, where you can increase the segments individually, and you can even harden the normals there, which makes it so that the smaller amounts of bevels affect it more. See there again, shading by angle, and it looks quite smooth, even though there's only 2 bevels there. Well, 2 bevel segments. Now, something that was missing in my opinion was the little skirting board that would go around. So I duplicate the floor using Shift D again. I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down on the x-axis, make it just almost a square, and slotting it in perfectly in the little side there. And you see I'm just double checking for gaps. I go ahead, duplicate the skirting board, and I end up rotating it on the z-axis 90 degrees, and then using it again for the other side, making sure that that isn't sticking out on the edge and is instead intersecting in the wall. And then I'm applying the scale to both of those. So you can either apply location, rotation, or scale, or any other alternative properties that you have as well. But for this demonstration, I only applied the scale. This stops our bevels or anything like that becoming morphed by the different default shape of these objects. And see I'm going in there now with Control B. And instead of having it outwards, I'm going to change the shape so that it goes inwards by making it just around 0. And you see there, it adds a nice little inner sort of mitre effect. I think it looks quite nice. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and add the this is usually a monkey for Blender users. However, because I have the plugin extra objects module added, I ended up using the teapot from 3ds Max. I'm making sure it's just sat on that table very nicely, moving up and down on the z-axis, and then rotating it just a little bit to find a good angle. There we are. You see everything white because there's no assigned materials just yet. Switching back to the matte cap, realize that I haven't added the windowsill. We'll go ahead and draw in a cube there. And then just scaling it out ever so slightly on the x-axis. As well as just making sure that it perfectly lines up with the edges of there. Just going to pull it forward a bit on the x-axis so that the window is hanging more inwards. There we are. Next, I'm going to move over to making some bottles for the shelf. Again, holding Shift, using the Draw Cylinder tool, insetting a face to create the sort of neck of the bottle, using Extrude just to extrude the top, inset again. I realized it's messed up, so I do Control Z. Going down to add a bevel, again with Control B. You can see there the width is wrong, so I end up messing with it and rechanging it to be more outward instead of inwards. Scaling it inwards just a little bit, because the neck of the bottle was slightly too thick. Moving it up slightly more past the Z-axis, make for a bit of a longer neck. So you can't see it there, but I'm actually selecting the bottom of the bottle. Just add a bevel onto the bottom. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add an inset face on top. With an extrude, scale outwards, however I don't want it to scale upwards on the Z-axis. So I have set that to 1 in the little menu that appears in the bottom. You can see me do it there again. And then move down the bottom neck of the bottle, add a little bevel to it. Only 2 segments this time, I don't want to go crazy on topology. Adding a slight bevel to the rest of the neck of the bottle. I don't actually end up liking this in the end, I do change it later on in the video. See there, I don't like how tight it is, so I'm just moving it up slightly. Not even more. Starting to look more like a bottle now. So I ended up adding a cork. Using a few extrusions, getting the rough shape down. Adding a rough bevel there because I thought it was slightly too sharp. However, that bevel doesn't quite go as far as I'd like it to, so I do it again. And there we are. You can see there's a few sharps. So I end up clearing those and shading smooth instead. Now, to duplicate it, I'm going to save some time and I'm just going to press Shift D to duplicate it. Shrink it down a little bit just to change the size and line it up with the shelf. See, they're making this one quite tall. And making one slightly shorter one as well. Making it a bit bigger. And then shrinking it back down. And there. Those are my little bottles on the shelf. We will come back to those a little later to change the mesh after I realized a couple of things were off with it. Just changing the layout slightly. And there we are. You can see the nice silhouette of those there. You can see it in orthographic view as well. Next, we're going to jump on over to Polyhaven, a little free asset library. If you have the Blender add-on, you can choose them straight in there. However, I do not, and I went to the website to download them and import them myself. See here, I picked a little floor texture. So I'm making sure to download the blend file. See there, it's downloading in the top right. Next, I go ahead and go and get a brick texture. However, here I'm still stuck in the floor section, so I won't see any brick walls. Takes me a minute to realize this, however, so unfortunately you have to suffer through this. You see now I've found brick wall textures, realizing that I wasn't in the wall section. I return to the asset library, go to textures, search for brick. See there, now there's a few more walls. So if you make the same mistake, you now know how to avoid it. See there, I'm struggling to decide. However, I end up settling on this nice sort of lighter coloured brick. Next, I wanted to get a material for the table. See there, I found wood table. Seemed like a nice sort of walnut colour, and decided to go for that one. They're all being saved to the downloads folder, which you'll see in a moment. However, I wanted to get sort of a weathered look for the little skirting boards on the walls, so I end up settling with this wood peeling paint. You'll see now that I'm gonna pull up the downloads folder. I'm gonna select all of the zip files that I just downloaded. I'm gonna cut them. I'm gonna go into the drive that I have all my work on. You see there my previous work from 3ds Max. We're gonna go ahead and make a new folder. I'm gonna just title it video tutorial. And in there, I'm just gonna paste them. Next, you want to go ahead and extract them. You can see here, they'll eventually pop up. There's the wood table. There's the paint. Brick wall. And finally, the laminate flooring. We just gotta wait for it to extract. And there we go. Next, we are going to see that there's a blend file in there. Once you realize they've extracted properly, you're gonna hop back into Blender. You're gonna go ahead to the append section. Well, first I'm gonna name my file. Just gonna name it something like video tutorial. You can't actually see that on the video. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and hop over to the shading tab. Go to File, Append. You can't see it here, but I'm actually selecting the material file. There is one that you can see that I will show for you later on. I think it's the last one. See here now it's in that little tab menu. You can see inside the material editor. You see all the little different nodes and graphs. You can see that originally it was applied to the bottle, however, so I have to reapply it to the floor. However, it's a little bit big, so we're going to go over here to the mapping node. I'm going to increase the scale, or alternatively, you can go object. However, this can cause your textures to warp a bit on the sides. As you can see there, it stretched it. However, we're just going to increase the scale to about 3, maybe 4, somewhere around there. Yeah, that looks nice. You see it in rendered there, however, there's no lights. See all the different things like the displacement node. I wouldn't mess with these, especially if you don't know what they do. You can see here in layout mode, it's not applied, so you don't even have to be in the shading tab anymore. Next, we're going to do the skirting boards. Going ahead and doing the same again in the append menu. Again, you can't see it. However, you will see later on how I do this on the walls. Go ahead again and selecting the flooring. You can see that it imported slightly wrong. Same again for that one. However, it's a little bit stretched. This might just be, however, due to the shape of the object. Even if I apply the scale, nothing really changes. So what I instead go and do is I go into shading, and for this one, I'm going to change it from UV to object. See that it's a little bit too close for comfort, so I'm just going to increase the scale a little bit. There we go. Doing the same again for the table, importing the wood texture. Taking a little bit longer for this one to import. Oh, well, there we are. You can see it right there. We're going to go ahead and do this for all of the bits of our table. And we're also going to reuse it on the shelf and the windowsill. See that changing it to object doesn't work best in this one, as it stretches it all across everything. So we're going to just keep it on UV. You see there it's mostly fine. We're going to increase the scale slightly. However, on the sides it looks a little bit wrong, so we're just going to undo that. Next, we're going to go on to the bottles, which we're going to do a little bit differently. I'm actually going to make the cork slightly taller. You can see I'm doing this by selecting each of the top faces, pressing O, and using something called proportional editing, making the necks of the bottle a little too long there, which you can see I think looks alright originally. I take a better look at it and I'm like, no, that doesn't look quite right. Especially that end one there that's really tall. So I will go back in and I will decrease the radius of proportional editing just by using the scroll wheel till it only moves the cork, which you can see there. Now I have a little bit more of a protruding cork, and the glass bottle rim doesn't really blend in with the cork as well. I'm going to quickly make our own material for the pot. Just doing this by making a base colour, a little bit of a turquoise, turning down the roughness a little bit just so we have a better reflections. You can even add a bit of metallic if you wanted to. I end up adding a little bit just for a bit of better shadows and reflections. Can mess with IQR to make it just a little bit shinier. You can see there how it's shining. Next up, we're going to add the wall texture. You can actually see here, file, append, and you can actually see it this time. I'm just going to go to where I saved them. So you see the video tutorial, they're in there. Brick wall, material, and then the brick wall. We're next going to apply it. See there, it's mapped in the wrong way. So what you want to go ahead and do is you can try and change the object, but even then it still saves the wrong way around. So you have to go to the rotation. Originally I think it's the y-axis, however then I realize it should be the z-axis. End up rotating this perfectly 90 degrees. You can also type in there rather than just scroll up. Scale it down just a bit, just to make sure that there's an actual sort of brick wall and not just massive bricks. You can see there on the corner, bricks the wrong way around, which unfortunately are going to have to happen if you don't unwrap your models. Changing it to object though, while it works, I decided to settle with going back to the UV rather than the stretch look. We're also just going to go ahead and set the material of our skirting boards to the underside of the shells. See there, a little bit of a darker colour. And then finally, the windowsill is going to be done the same material as the table and the shelf. we're also going to go ahead and apply the scale. See there, it looks fine. Next up, we're actually going to do two different materials for the bottles. We're going to go ahead and make a glass material. Just set it to a bit of a turquoise blue. Turn up the roughness and turn down the alpha. Applying it all to every single bottle. Next, I'm going to go in and select the cork to each thing. See there, just selecting only the cork. Going in, making another material in the same slot. Naming it cork. Going for a bit of sort of brown colour. Assigning it. You see there, it only applied to one. I'm going to go ahead and add it in each and every other one. And finally, last one. Oh, I accidentally enabled X-ray mode there. So okay, just going to disable it from up there. There you go. You can see that the material is applied to each and every one. I'm going to turn up the roughness a lot. This cork's quite a rough material and doesn't really reflect that light that much. See there, it is in rendered view. However, you still can't really see it that well without any lighting. Again, in the orthographic view, we're going to go ahead and go over to the shading thing, and we're going to take out that image thing by, if we hover over the BDSF, you can press Ctrl T, and it will add a mapping node for you, as well as a texture coordinate node. Then add a color ramp, setting one of them to be quite a dark brown, and the next one to be the same color using the color picker, and then just lighting it up a bit on the right there, moving a bit towards more the orange scale as well. Next, I'm going to move all of these along. I'm going to add a noise transform, noise texture, sorry. Just going to turn up the scale quite a bit. You can see there it's appearing and changing it on the thing, changing it to object as well, just so it fits that shape of the cork just that little bit better. Next, I'm going to try and make it a normal map. However, that is the wrong node. You shouldn't use that one. You should go for the normal map node, which I end up realizing. Go from color, go to normal map strength. Plug the normal into the normal. See there, it's just a little bit more spectral. I'm also going to go ahead and add a displacement, which won't do much. That's a slight difference. You see there, a bit more detail, very varied in color. Messing around with the settings, realizing it was bad the other way, and then changing it back. Next, we're going to go into rendered mode. See there, they all look fine. You see how the bottles are slightly transparent. And we're actually going to go ahead and duplicate the walls 2 more times. However, these walls are not going to be visible in the final render. Just make sure to line it up. Rotating it 180 degrees so that the normal's the right way around. Go down to viewport display. However, not in the materials section. I am in the wrong area here. You should go to the little icon with the orange section. It takes me a minute to remember where it is. Just above this banner is the orange icon. I'll get there eventually. You can see there, you go down to viewport display, textured, and change it to bounds. You can see there now we have sort of an invisible wireframe of it. Going to do the same again, but with the back wall. And there we are. Next, we're going to go ahead and change ray visibility to disable the camera. So then you don't see it through the actual render. You can see the walls don't appear, however, they are there for shadow casting. I'm going to bring in the sun. See there, a bit of light has been added. We're going to add a slight bit of yellow. You can see that I added too much. Everything's sort of got a yellow tinge, so I'm just moving it back ever so slightly to be changing the angle. Next, we're going to go ahead and move it just to the side of where the window is, realizing I overshot and hit the wall. So I'm just going to bring it in through by grabbing that little yellow ball, right to track it to sort of the wall. Move the sun again, doing the same again just to try and get that perfect lighting. I think here the lighting was just too weak, so I ended up turning up the scale. See there, GPU computer's on, we're in cycles, everything all is correct. Turn up to maybe 2. And this could be fine if you're going for more of a grungier look. However, I do want it lit up a bit more, so later on I do turn up the brightness of the light. I attempt to add a area light. You can see it's a bit more of a diffuse lighting and not the whole world lighting changing. Trying to get it to go through the window, which does work. You can see it when I turn up the power. You see the sort of white shadow being cast around the table there. However, it doesn't really look natural, since we now have 2 different angles of light coming in through the same window, which could be fine. However, I didn't end up liking the look of it, so I removed it. Go back to the area that you see there. It's just doing it with the sort of white shadow. You can even use a spotlight. However, again, this doesn't really fit the scene, so didn't really go with it. Point light. However, I ended up just deleting this extra light and focusing more on the sunlight. Do an orthographic view again. Looks quite nice. We're going to select the sun. I'm going to go ahead and set that to 20, and it's brightened up a lot more now. I'm going to change the angle slightly just so that it's not as bright on top. There we are. See that black effect? That's the denoising of the viewport in the renders. The more samples you have, the more time this will take. However, the nicer the final product will be. Usually you don't want to have any more than, I like 16, however, I would say 64 for viewport display. I've just made a camera and snapped it to the view that I was in, which by pressing Ctrl-Alt-0 on the numpad, which snaps the camera to the current view. So I'm just lining it up there with the orthographic view. Getting ready to do the render. See there, max sample 64 for the render. I end up turning it to 128 just for a bit of a crisper image. And then rendering the image, you can see that at the bottom, the progress there. There we are. You see there we have the Boolean square. So you shouldn't really save your you shouldn't really save your image with that there. You see that in a minute I'm going to rectify that by just going back into the viewport. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide that cube from the renderer. You'll see that in a moment. Here we are back in. We're going to go over to the cube. You see there the little camera icon. You're going to disable that. You can also disable the eye, however you don't really need to if you don't want to, as long as it's disabled on the camera. You also see a bit of the wireframe there. We're just going to close down this little transform thing. And we're just going to re-render it. See there, the render is going again at the bottom. It's now been completed. And I'll show you the render. And there we are. There it is with the hollow window. I'm also just going to save it as. Don't forget to save the blend file as a compressed file so that you keep all your materials and everything. And thanks for watching. Bye.